Yeehaw! It's time to... I'm sorry, I'm not going to subject you to that. Anyway, Donnie, that is Donnel, is very, very special. As you can see by this growth chart, that I pretty much had to increase his scale here, because if I did put him on the same scale as the other characters, he would break the scale, basically. Donnel is pretty much the Est character of this game. For those who don't know, Est is basically the Fire Emblem series equivalent of Magikarp from the Pokemon series. Someone who starts out pathetically weak, but has insanely good growth rates and will eventually become ridiculously awesome. Now, the Fire Emblem fandom as a whole has a really massive, violent hatred for a lot of these characters most of the time. It seems that the vast majority of people in the fandom would rather have immediate gratification and results rather than any long-term payoff that requires effort. But in this game, at least, Donnel has the benefit of coming early in the game, so at least he doesn't suffer there. Now, as you can see, the main thing about Donnel is his growth rates are absolutely ridiculous. That's not exactly due to him, though. It's from a skill he has that gives plus 20 to every single one of his growths. So, yeah, think Blossom from Path of Radiance on Soth, except not terrible. And the thing is, you'll probably notice here that his actual class growths here are really tiny. Yeah, these growths there, they might look really good now, but oh boy, wait till you see what they look like when he actually graduates to a proper class. I don't normally show growth rates in other classes other than a character's base class, but I'll make an exception here because really you don't want Donnel to be his base class for very long. When he changes to another class, yeah, his growths get even more impressive. As you can see, strength, skill, and speed are all above 80. Considering 80 is literally the highest you ever get for any growth for any other character in this game, except for HP, pretty much. Yeah, and speaking of HP, look at Donnel's HP growth there. That's not 75, that's actually 40 plus 75. So that's pretty ridiculous. Donnie is pretty much guaranteed to gain enormous amounts of stat ups per level up, and that compensates for the fact that his starting stats are incredibly pathetic. Now, in the actual chapter footage itself, I'll be showing how you really need to help Donnie get his first few level ups. Once he does, though, and his growth start kicking in, then he can pretty much handle himself for quite a while. Because his stats start going pretty much completely insane. Speaking of insane, though, the one stat that Donnie has in abundance even before he starts leveling up is luck. It's a very good base, and he has one of the highest growths of that stat to luck in the entire game, so Donnie's luck is pretty ridiculous. Not only that, but he has a plus 3 cap to luck, so it's one of his best areas, and this is going to come in very handy shortly. I'm going to explain why, but Donnie's luck is in a way his one saving grace. Hang on a minute, why do you say something like that? With growths this amazing, of course Donnie is by far one of the best characters in the game, right? Surely he doesn't have any drawbacks, right? Actually, he kind of does. And that's an important point that you need to consider. Not the fact that he starts out weak, but here's the thing. Look at his caps. His cap modifiers are actually quite bad. Apart from strength, defense, and luck, he's got negative modifiers in everything else. -1 to skill, speed, resistance, and magic. The magic isn't that big a deal, but skill and speed at -1 as well. Donnie pretty much doesn't excel in anything except for luck, really. Strength and defense +1 is not nearly as high of a cap as you'll normally see, and for this reason it's kind of weird. Early on in the game, of course, Donnie is pathetically weak. During the mid-game, he's utterly ridiculous and is pretty much a complete and total game breaker. But later in the game, once his stats actually max out, he gets outclassed by an awful lot of people simply due to his low caps. So really, rather than an exponential graph like most Magikarp-type characters tend to be as far as usefulness goes, Donnie's usefulness is more of a bell curve. If you don't know what those two mean, let me just give a bit of visual aid. Here's how you'd expect Donnie's awesomeness versus time graph to look, and here's what it actually looks like. So, while Donnie may be fantastically ridiculously overpowered during the mid-game. Late game, he actually tends to fall behind a little, but, I mean, I still think he's awesome. I still like using him. But, yeah, one of the other main disadvantages Donnie has comes with his class set, so we're going to have to talk about that next. Firstly, his classes work a bit interestingly. He starts out as the Villager class. Villager is pretty much terrible in every single respect. It has awful base stats, awful growth rates, incredibly awful maximum stats. Yeah, its maximum stats are roughly the equivalent of unpromoted classes in previous Fire Emblem games. Note that unpromoted classes in this game can go far higher, so basically the maximum stats of Villager are 20 in everything except luck, so it's pretty terrible and you want to get him out of it as soon as possible. But it's from this class that Donnie gets his real worth, basically, the aptitude skill, which adds 20 to all growth rates. That is a class skill for villagers, and because he's a level 1 villager, he automatically starts with that. So, pretty much, this class is kind of a necessary evil. If he didn't have this class, he wouldn't nearly be as good as he actually is. Now, the second skill that you learn at a Villager is learnt at level 15, not 10 like most other classes. Villager is considered a special class in this game. These classes can't, well, they don't have their own promotion, but they can reach a maximum level of 30 instead of 20. Trust me though, you do not want to get him that high as a Villager. That is just an incredibly stupid idea, because you want to get rid of the Villager class as soon as possible. At level 15, he'll learn the Underdog skill, which gives a plus 15 boost to accuracy and evasion against enemies that are higher level than you. Now, this is actually quite interesting because this works based off of your displayed level, not your internal level. I'm getting into a bit complicated terminology here, but basically let's just say this. I'm going to go ahead and copy an example straight from serenadesforest.net. So, in this example, if Donnie uses a second seal as a level 15 villager to reclass to a level 1 mercenary, his actual level according to the internal workings of the game, which is used to calculate how much experience points he needs to level up next time, becomes 15 minus 1 over 2, which equals 5, and add that to his level as a mercenary, which is 1, so that equals 8. So, effectively, Donnie is considered level 8 for the purposes of the game. However, he is still displayed as a level 1 mercenary. And that is what is used to calculate Underdog, at least I'm pretty sure, because if it wasn't, then Underdog would be useless if you reclass too much. So that means that if he goes up against a level 2 enemy, then he gets the boost. Promoted enemies though, and if you're promoted, that adds 20 to your displayed level, so Donnie as a level 1 hero would count as level 21. But by that point, he'd probably be more like 41 when it comes to internal level, so it's definitely a good thing that this runs based off of displayed level and not internal level, let's just say. Long story short, it actually is a pretty helpful skill most of the time. That being said, the moment that you learn this skill, ditch Villager as soon as humanly possible. Trust me, you will be glad that you did. Donnie gets out of the Villager class not by using a Master Seal to promote, but rather by using a second seal to change to a different class tree. That's kind of how it works. From here he can choose between Mercenary or Fighter, and their respective promotions. Now, pretty much, because of his insane growth rates, Donnie is good no matter what class you make him. Fighter's skills aren't all that spectacular though. But Mercenary? Oh boy, Mercenary has one skill that is very, very useful for Donnel, and is actually pretty much his saving grace in the late game. Something that actually makes him really, really worth using, and that is Arms Thrift. Arms Thrift is a skill that, when it activates, you don't consume a use of your weapon, that attack. Why is this so useful for Donnel in particular? Well, this skill's activation chance is double your luck stat. He happens to have an utterly enormous luck growth, and luck is one of the few stats that he has a positive cap in. In fact, he has plus 3 to it. What this means is that in one of his final classes, Donnie has a maximum luck of 48. 48 times 2 is 96. This basically means that every time Donnie attacks, he has a 96% chance of not consuming a weapon use. For all intents and purposes, this basically makes his weapons permanently unbreakable as long as he holds them. Meaning, pretty much infinite use legendary weapons. Infinite use anything, basically. Yeah, this actually gets pretty ridiculous, and in my opinion, is really the one main reason to use Donnie. He's actually quite good at this, and in a lot of ways, it does actually make up for some of his shortcomings in the cap department. I mean, seriously, who wouldn't want infinite use weapons? Well, virtually infinite use. The other advantage to this luck stat that Donnie has, I might as well explain this now, is using Leif's Sword. It's a weapon that you can obtain from event tiles, and I think from Renown. It basically gives you the Despoil skill, which gives you a luck % chance of getting a small gold bar every time you defeat an enemy. With Donnie, that chance is ridiculously high, so you can grind money quite easily that way, and with Arms Thrift, you don't need to worry about the sword breaking. So that's pretty amazing. Now, as far as promoted options go, Donnie's promoted options from Mercenary are Bow Knight and Hero. Bow Knight comes with, again, a rally skill. Donnie does get 2 rally skills, but he's not exactly the best rally user out there, even though rally strength is relatively hard to come by. Bowbreaker is somewhat decent, especially since from Hero he also gets Axebreaker, but I guess it's alright, really. As a hero, though, he'll get the Soul skill, which certainly helps keep his health topped up, which his HP actually tends to get very, very high, so he does make good use of that. As a warrior, he can get Counter, which I've said it before and I'll say it again. Counter is much better when enemies use it than when you use it. Overall, Donnie does decently no matter what class he's in, however, he does have a few problems that concern his class options. Firstly, the fact that Villager is counted as an entire class tree on its own right means that he basically loses out on 3 potential classes compared to other characters, and because of that, he really loses out on a lot of potentially useful skills as well. But the main problem with Donnie's class options is this. Villager uses Lancers. Notice something weird? Out of all 5 other classes that he can graduate to from Villager, none of them can use Lancers. So here we have a pretty serious problem. As a Villager, Donnel will most likely max out his Lance rank very, very quickly. But it's totally pointless, because he can't use Lancers in any other of his class options. It's actually really irritating, and it really makes you wish that he did have an option that used Lancers, but sadly he doesn't. As far as class options go though, I will say, if you have access to DLC, Donnel does make a really, really good Dread Fighter, mainly because he'll be one of the few who has very good growths in both strength and magic, and hey, it'll finally let him put his actually really good magic growth to good use. But that's pretty much all I'll say here. Donnie is very much a case of your mileage may vary as far as how useful he'll be to you. He actually does suffer a bit in the endgame due to his lack of class options and his lower caps, but if you prefer, Arms Thrift can make up for that quite a lot. That's pretty much his main niche, and well, in the middle game he's utterly ridiculous, so yeah. But there is one very important thing to discuss about Donnie, and that is that while it's not forced, you really, really, really want to make sure that he marries someone. Because that's the only way to pass down aptitude to the 2nd generation, and yes, it is possible to pass this on. And if Donnie himself is kind of weak in the endgame, oh boy, his children certainly are not. Anyone fathered by Donnel will end up being one of the most broken characters in the game, and because of that, you definitely do want to make sure that he ends up with someone. Now, how you go about passing down aptitude differs depending on whether or not his child is going to be a guy or a girl. Because weirdly enough, despite being a special class, Villager is actually inheritable, but it's male only. So if Donnel's going to have a male child, you don't need to worry about passing down aptitude. His son will actually have access to the Villager class, and he'll be able to reclass to that and immediately learn aptitude, so actually might not be such a good idea to pass that down, given, again, how easily they'll be able to access it. And this actually does apply to Morgan as well, if Donnel is paired up with a female avatar. If Donnie's child's going to be female, though, you need to make sure that aptitude is the skill that he passes down to them. Because Villager being a male-exclusive class, that is the only way they will ever be able to have aptitude. So, again, if his child is going to be female, make sure you have him pass down aptitude. Make sure you do that, because that is the only way to get aptitude on the second generation. In my case, his child is going to be female, so I'm going to have to make sure that they inherit this skill. Again though, if the child is male, they will inherit the villager class itself, so they'll have easy access to aptitude that way. Of course, you really don't want anyone to be a villager for very long. Just reclass them to that, get the skill, then get out of it immediately, because villager is a terrible class. One more thing about Donnel, though, is if you're doing a no-grinding run of Lunatic mode, he really is not going to be that useful to you. Simply put, there is almost no way you can possibly train him without severely gimping the rest of your army, and considering it's Lunatic mode, it's not exactly all that worth it, so Donnie is best used on... If you are going to use him on Lunatic mode, you might have to grind him in DLC. That's pretty much the best you can do. If you're thinking you can just grind him in Risen Skirmishes, oh no you can't. They have taken precautions against that. Risen Skirmishes on Lunatic mode, you don't even want to know. You don't want to know, trust me. Trust me. They have maxed out stats right at the beginning of the game in promoted classes. Yeah. As for his voice actor, Donnel is voiced by Sam Riegel, who also voices Stahl in this game. Now, remember how I said on Stahl's entry that I'd be talking more about Sam Riegel once we got to the other character he voices? Yeah! I kind of find his role here as Donnel kind of interesting, because this isn't the first time that Sam Riegel has done a southern accent. He also played Tennessee Kid Cooper in Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. And this just makes Donnie all the more awesome to me, because Tennessee's voice... In fact, Tennessee is a character in himself. Basically, imagine Donnie, slightly older, kind of crazy, ridiculously awesome, and with a shotgun. That's basically Tennessee Kid Cooper. And if I play my cards right, Donnie is gonna become that awesome during this playthrough, so looking forward to that.